The morning sun cast long shadows across Copper Creek's dusty main street as 17-year-old Mary Sullivan swept the soot from her father's blacksmith shop. The rhythmic clanging of hammer against anvil had already begun, a sound that had been the soundtrack of her entire life. Through the open doorway, she could see her father, Thomas Sullivan, his massive frame bent over glowing metal, sweat glistening on his weathered face despite the early hour. "Mary, girl, where's that bucket of water I asked for?" His Irish accent still carried strong after 20 years in this Arizona frontier town. "Coming, Papa." Mary hurried to the well behind the shop, her worn brown dress catching on the wooden handle. As she pumped water into the dented metal bucket, she caught sight of her reflection in the surface, soot-stained cheeks, calloused hands, and hair that refused to stay pinned properly despite her best efforts. The sound of laughter drifted from the general store across the street. Through the window, she could see Margaret Whitmore and Susan Baker, both dressed in their finest Sunday dresses despite it being Tuesday. Their fathers owned the bank and the largest cattle ranch respectively, and they never let anyone forget it. "Look at her," Margaret's voice carried clearly in the still morning air. "Poor thing can't even keep herself clean. No wonder no decent young man in town pays her any mind." Mary's cheeks burned, but she kept pumping. She'd learned long ago that showing reaction only made it worse. "My mother says it's a shame Thomas Sullivan never remarried," Susan added, adjusting her perfectly arranged blonde curls. "That poor girl needs a woman's guidance. She's practically feral, spending all her time in that dirty shop." The bucket overflowed, cold water spilling over Mary's boots. She hefted the heavy container and trudged back toward the forge, where her father was shaping a horseshoe for the preacher's mare. "You're quiet today, lass," Thomas observed, glancing up from his work. His blue eyes, so much like her own, held concern. "Something troubling you?" Mary set down the bucket and picked up the bellows, working them steadily to keep the fire hot. "Papa, why do people think I'm so strange?" Thomas set down his hammer and looked at his daughter, really looked at her. At 17, she was tall for a woman, nearly matching his own broad shoulders. Her hands, though smaller than his, were equally skilled with tools and metal. She had her mother's dark hair and delicate features, but there was something else there, a strength that most folks in Copper Creek couldn't understand in a woman. "People fear what they don't understand, Mary. In this town, women are expected to be delicate flowers, content to tend house and raise children. But you," he smiled, pride evident in his weathered features. "You've got iron in your soul, just like your mother did. That scares some folks. But I want to be respected, Papa. I want people to see that I'm more than just the blacksmith's strange daughter." Thomas wiped his hands on his leather apron and placed them gently on Mary's shoulders. "Respect isn't something you can force, lass. It's something you earn. And when the time comes, you'll show them what you're truly made of." From outside came the sound of approaching horses and wagon wheels. Mary peered out to see a dust cloud approaching from the east. Visitors were always cause for excitement in their small town. As the wagon came into view, she could see it was a merchant caravan, the kind that brought supplies and news from the bigger cities. "Looks like we'll have some business today," Thomas said, straightening his apron. "Why don't you help me organize the horseshoes? These traveling folk always need repairs." As Mary arranged the various sizes of shoes on the workbench, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change in Copper Creek. The way the horses in the approaching caravan were moving, nervous and skittish, suggested they were carrying more than just ordinary supplies. She was right to be curious. In the back of the last wagon, secured with heavy ropes and wooden barriers, was a sight that would soon transform her from the town's laughingstock into its most talked-about resident. The merchant caravan had been in town for 3 days, and the excitement was palpable. Copper Creek rarely saw such a large group of traders, and the variety of goods they brought had drawn people from neighboring settlements. Mary found herself stealing glances at the wagons whenever she could, fascinated by the stories the merchants told of distant places and grand adventures. It was during her afternoon break that she overheard the conversation that would change everything. "That stallion of yours is going to be the death of someone," said Jake Morrison, the town's only lawman, addressing the lead merchant, a grizzled man named Samuel Hayes. "He's not mine by choice," Hayes replied, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "Was supposed to deliver him to a ranch outside Phoenix, but the buyer backed out when he saw what we were dealing with. Now, I'm stuck with him." Mary crept closer to the general store's porch where the men were gathered. From her hiding spot behind a wooden crate, she could see them clearly. "What's so special about one horse?" asked Dr. Williams, the town physician, mopping sweat from his brow with a handkerchief. Hayes let out a bitter laugh. "Special? That animal is pure lightning and fury rolled into one. Black as midnight, stands 17 hands high, and hasn't let a soul near him in the 2 months we've had him. Already injured 3 men who tried to break him. So why keep him? Why not just let him go?" This from Robert Baker, Susan's father and owner of the largest ranch in the county. "Are you mad?" Hayes shook his head. "That horse is worth more than most folks see in a lifetime, if someone can tame him. Bloodline goes back to the finest Arabian stock. Problem is, he's got the spirit of the devil himself." Mary's heart began to race. She'd grown up around horses, helping her father shoe them, learning their moods and temperaments. There was something about the way Hayes described this stallion that called to something deep inside her. "Well, you better keep him secured," Sheriff Morrison warned. "This town's got enough problems without a killer horse loose in the streets." That evening, Mary sat with her father on the porch of their small cabin behind the blacksmith shop. The day's heat was finally breaking, and a warm breeze carried the scent of desert sage and the distant sound of cattle lowing. "Papa, do you remember teaching me about horses when I was little?" she asked, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Thomas chuckled, rocking slowly in his handmade chair. "How could I forget? You were barely 5 years old, insisting you could shoe old Martha's pony all by yourself. Nearly took my thumb off with that little hammer I made you. You always said I had a way with them, that they trusted me." "Aye, that you did. Still do, from what I can see. Just last week you calmed that spooked mare when thunder rolled through. Took 3 men to hold her, but 1 touch from you, and she settled right down." Mary was quiet for a long moment, gathering courage. "Papa, what would you say if I told you I wanted to do something that might make people talk?" Thomas stopped rocking and looked at his daughter carefully. "I'd say that people are going to talk no matter what you do, Mary. The question is, what do you want them to say? I want them to say I'm brave. I want them to say I'm capable of more than they imagined. Then you'd better be ready to prove it, lass. Because once you set your mind to something, there's no going back. You're too much like your mother for that." The next morning brought unexpected drama. Mary was cleaning tools in the shop when shouting erupted from the center of town. Through the open door, she could see people running toward the main street, panic in their voices. "The horse! The wild horse got loose!" Mary dropped her cleaning rag and ran outside. In the dusty street, chaos reigned. The black stallion Hayes had described stood in the middle of the thoroughfare, magnificent and terrifying. He was everything the merchant had said. Tall, powerful, with a coat so dark it seemed to absorb the morning sunlight. His eyes rolled wildly as townspeople scrambled for safety, shouting and pointing. "Someone get Sheriff Morrison!" yelled the banker Whitmore from behind an overturned cart. "Where's Hayes? This is his problem." Susan Baker's voice was shrill with fear as she pressed herself against the general store's wall. The stallion reared, his hooves cutting through the air, dangerously close to Mrs. Patterson, the elderly seamstress, who had frozen in terror in the middle of the street. Without thinking, Mary began walking toward the chaos. Her father's voice called after her, but she barely heard it. All her attention was focused on the magnificent, frightened animal that held the entire town hostage. This was her moment. She could feel it in her bones, in the rapid beating of her heart, in the way her hands remained steady despite the danger. Everything she'd ever learned, every gentle touch she'd given to a spooked horse, every whispered word of comfort, it had all been leading to this. "Mary, no!" Her father's voice was closer now, filled with fear for his daughter's safety. But Mary Sullivan had made her choice. It was time to show Copper Creek what she was really made of. The stallion's nostrils flared as he sensed the fear radiating from every person in sight. His powerful muscles tensed beneath his gleaming black coat, and for a moment Mary thought he might bolt, or worse, charge into the crowd of terrified townspeople. "Stay back, Mary!" Sheriff Morrison had appeared at the end of the street, his hand hovering near his gun. "That animal is dangerous." But Mary had already stepped past the safety of the boardwalk. The packed dirt of Main Street felt solid beneath her worn boots, and despite the chaos around her, she felt a strange calm settling over her shoulders like a familiar shawl. "Someone stop that foolish girl." Margaret Whitmore's voice pierced the air from where she cowered behind her father's buggy. "She's going to get herself killed!" The stallion's head snapped toward Mary, and their eyes met across 30 feet of dust and fear. In that moment, she saw not a monster or a devil, but a creature in pain. His left flank bore the marks of ropes and whips, evidence of the men who had tried to break him. His eyes, wild as they were, held an intelligence that spoke of betrayal and mistrust. "Easy, boy," Mary said, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the suddenly still air. "Easy now." The horse's ears twitched forward, the first sign that he was listening rather than simply reacting. Mary took another step, then another, her movements slow and deliberate. Behind her she could hear the collective held breath of the entire town. "Mary, please!" Her father's voice was thick with worry, but she couldn't turn back now. This moment felt predestined, as if every day of her 17 years had been leading to this dusty street, this frightened animal, this chance to prove herself. "You're hurt, aren't you?" she continued, taking another careful step. "Someone hurt you, and now you don't know who to trust." The stallion's nostrils flared again, but this time there was something different in his posture. His head lowered slightly, and though his muscles remained tense, he didn't retreat. From the crowd, she heard Samuel Hayes's gruff voice. "Girls got more courage than brains. That horse has injured 3 grown men." "Shut up, Hayes." Her father's voice cut through the tension. "Let her work." Mary was close enough now to see the intelligence burning in the stallion's dark eyes. She could smell his sweat, see the slight tremor in his powerful legs. He was as afraid as everyone watching, maybe more so. "I know what it's like," she whispered, extending her right hand slowly, palm up, "to be different, to have everyone expect you to be something you're not." The horse's eyes fixed on her outstretched hand. For a long moment, neither moved. The entire town seemed suspended in time, the only sound the gentle whisper of wind through the desert sage. Then, so gradually it was almost imperceptible, the stallion's head began to lower. His neck, arched high in fear and defiance, slowly relaxed. His muzzle, velvet soft despite his wild nature, touched Mary's palm with the gentleness of a falling leaf. The gasp that rose from the crowd was audible, but Mary barely heard it. All her attention was focused on the magnificent creature before her, on the trust he was cautiously offering. She could feel the warmth of his breath, the slight tremor that ran through him as human contact proved, for the first time in months, to be gentle rather than harmful. "That's it," she murmured, using her free hand to slowly, carefully stroke the side of his powerful neck. "You're safe now. I won't hurt you. The stallion's eyes began to calm, the wild rolling subsiding as Mary continued her gentle ministrations. She could feel the exact moment when his fear began to transform into curiosity, when his distrust started to crack like ice in the spring sun. Behind her, the silence was broken by a voice she didn't expect, Susan Baker, her usual mockery replaced by genuine awe. "I don't believe what I'm seeing." "None of us do," whispered Dr. Williams. "That girl just did what 3 experienced horsemen couldn't." Mary slowly moved to the stallion's side. her hand never losing contact with his neck. As she did, she caught sight of the crowd that had gathered. It seemed like every person in Copper Creek was there, watching in amazement. Margaret Whitmore's mouth was actually hanging open. Sheriff Morrison had removed his hand from his gun and was staring in frank admiration, but it was her father's face that made Mary's heart soar. Thomas Sullivan stood at the front of the crowd, tears of pride streaming down his weathered cheeks, his massive blacksmith's hands pressed together as if in prayer. "Well, I'll be damned," Hayes muttered, approaching slowly with a lead rope. "In 20 years of horse trading, I've never seen anything like this." The stallion's ears flicked toward the approaching merchant, and Mary felt his muscles tense slightly. She continued her gentle strokes, whispering words of comfort. "It's all right," she told the horse. "You're going to be just fine now." As Hayes carefully clipped the lead rope to the stallion's halter, Mary finally turned to face the crowd. The faces looking back at her were transformed, no longer dismissive or mocking, but filled with respect, admiration, and not a little awe. Margaret Whitmore was the first to break the silence, her voice small and sincere. "Mary, I'm sorry for all the things I said. What you just did it was incredible." The murmur of agreement that rose from the crowd was like music to Mary's ears. But more than the praise, more than the admiration, it was the look in her father's eyes that told her everything had changed. She had found her moment, and in finding it, she had found herself. 2 weeks had passed since the incident with the stallion, and Copper Creek had settled into a new rhythm. The black horse, now called Thunder at Mary's suggestion, remained with Hayes while arrangements were made for his future. But everything else had changed. Mary still worked in her father's forge, still had soot under her fingernails and calluses on her hands. But now, when she walked down Main Street, people nodded respectfully. Men tipped their hats, women smiled genuinely rather than whispered behind gloved hands. "Miss Mary!" called little Tommy Patterson, the seamstress's grandson, running up to her with bright eyes. "Ma says you're going to show me how to be brave like you." Mary knelt down to the 8-year-old's level, her heart warming. "Bravery isn't about not being scared, Tommy. It's about doing what's right even when you are scared." "Were you scared when you walked up to Thunder?" Mary considered the question seriously. "Terrified," she admitted. "But I knew he needed help more than I needed to be safe." As Tommy ran off to share this wisdom with his friends, Mary continued toward the general store. She needed supplies for the forge, and for the first time in her life, the errand felt like a pleasure rather than an ordeal. "Mary!" Susan Baker's voice called from across the street. The blonde young woman hurried over, her elaborate dress somehow managing to stay pristine despite the dusty street. "I wanted to ask you something." Mary tensed slightly, old habits of wariness hard to break. "My father's prize mare has been acting skittish lately," Susan continued, her tone earnest rather than condescending. "The men can't figure out what's wrong with her. Would you mind taking a look?" The request caught Mary off guard. Robert Baker was one of the most successful ranchers in the territory, and his prize horses were worth small fortunes. That he would trust her judgment was a sign of how much had truly changed. "I'd be happy to help," Mary replied, and was rewarded with Susan's first genuine smile directed her way. As they walked toward the Baker ranch, Susan spoke quietly. "I owe you an apology, Mary, a big one. I was jealous, I think, of how comfortable you seemed with yourself, how you never tried to be someone you weren't. I spent so much energy trying to fit into what I thought people wanted me to be, I forgot to figure out who I actually was." Mary glanced at her companion, seeing vulnerability she'd never noticed before. "We all do what we think we have to do to survive, Susan. The trick is figuring out when it's time to stop surviving and start living." At the Baker Ranch, Mary quickly diagnosed the mare's problem, a small stone lodged in her left front hoof that everyone else had missed. As she worked to remove it, speaking in gentle tones to keep the valuable animal calm, she felt Robert Baker watching her intently. "You've got a gift, young lady," he said when she finished. I've been raising horses for 30 years, and I've never seen anyone with your natural ability. Have you ever considered making it more than a hobby?" Mary looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'd like to offer you a job, part-time, working with my horses, teaching them, healing them, understanding them. The pay would be good, and it would give you a chance to do what you clearly love." The offer was tempting, but Mary shook her head. "Thank you, Mr. Baker, but my place is with my father. The forge needs me." Robert Baker smiled knowingly. "Talk to your father about it, Mary. You might be surprised by what he has to say." That evening, Mary sat with Thomas on their porch, sharing the day's events. The desert air was cooling, and the first stars were appearing in the vast Arizona sky. "Papa, Mr. Baker offered me work with his horses. I told him no, of course. You need me at the forge." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, rocking slowly in his chair. Finally, he spoke. "Mary, do you remember what I told you about your mother? You said she had iron in her soul. Aye, but there's more to the story. Your mother was an artist. Did you know that? Painted the most beautiful pictures you ever saw. But when we married and came west, she put away her brushes to help me build the forge. Said her art was a luxury we couldn't afford." Mary had never heard this before. "What happened to her paintings?" "I kept one," Thomas said softly, rising from his chair. "Wait here." He disappeared into their cabin and returned with a small canvas wrapped in cloth. When he unwrapped it, Mary gasped. The painting showed a woman, her mother, standing in a field of wildflowers, her face turned toward the sun. The joy and life in the brushstrokes was unmistakable. "She was talented," Mary whispered. "She was brilliant, and she died regretting that she never pursued her gift." Thomas rewrapped the painting carefully. "I won't make the same mistake with you, lass. The forge will survive without you, but you might not survive without following your calling." "But, Papa—" "No buts, Mary. You've proven you can stand on your own feet. Now it's time to walk your own path." 3 days later, Mary stood in the main street of Copper Creek once more. But this time the circumstances were entirely different. Hayes was preparing to leave town, and Thunder was saddled and ready to accompany her to the Baker Ranch. A gift from Hayes, who declared that the horse belonged with the only person who understood him. "You sure about this, girl?" Hayes asked, checking Thunder's tack one final time. Mary nodded, her hand resting on Thunder's neck. The stallion had transformed in the weeks since their first meeting, his coat gleaming with health, his eyes bright with intelligence and trust. He was still powerful, still spirited, but the wildness had been tempered by understanding and care. "Mary!" Margaret Whitmore approached, holding a small wrapped package. "I wanted to give you this. It's a journal for recording your work with the horses. I thought maybe someday you might write a book about your methods. Other people could learn from you." Mary accepted the gift with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Margaret. That's very thoughtful." As she prepared to mount Thunder for the first time, Mary looked around at the faces of the townspeople who had gathered to see her off. Her father stood proudly among them, no longer worried about his daughter's future, but excited for her possibilities. Sheriff Morrison stepped forward. "Mary, I want you to know that what you did that day, it didn't just tame a horse, it changed this whole town, made us all look at things differently." Thunder stood perfectly still as Mary swung into the saddle, their partnership now so complete that no words were needed between them. From his back, she could see the entire town spread out below. The forge where she'd learned the value of hard work, the streets where she'd endured mockery and found her strength, the people who had become her community. "Thank you," she called to the gathered crowd, "all of you, for teaching me that sometimes the hardest battles we fight are with ourselves." As she guided Thunder toward the Baker Ranch and her new life, Mary heard her father's voice calling after her. "Remember, lass, you've got iron in your soul and lightning in your heart. Don't ever let anyone tell you what you can't do." Thunder's hooves beat a steady rhythm on the packed earth, carrying Mary toward a future bright with possibility. Behind her, Copper Creek continued its daily business, but it was forever changed. The blacksmith's daughter had become the horse whisperer. The laughingstock had become the legend, and in proving herself, she had given everyone around her permission to believe in their own hidden strengths. The sun climbed higher in the desert sky, illuminating the path ahead with golden light as Mary Sullivan rode toward her destiny. No longer the girl who was different, but the young woman who had embraced her differences and transformed them into her greatest gift. In the distance, the Baker Ranch came into view, where new challenges and new opportunities waited. But Mary felt no fear, only excitement. She had learned the most important lesson of all, that true strength comes not from fitting in, but from having the courage to stand out. Thunder snorted softly beneath her, and Mary smiled, patting his neck. Together they had found their place in the world, not despite their wild spirits, but because of them. The story of the blacksmith's daughter who tamed the wild horse would be told in Copper Creek for generations to come, inspiring other young people to look beyond what others expected of them and to find the courage to be exactly who they were meant to be. And in that way, Mary Sullivan's greatest victory wasn't taming Thunder. It was learning to tame her own doubts and unleash the powerful, authentic person she had always been inside. The morning sun cast long shadows across the expanded Baker Ranch as Mary Sullivan, now Mary Sullivan Baker, after marrying Robert's eldest son James 2 years prior, guided a nervous colt through his first training session. At 22, she had grown into the confident woman her 17-year-old self had only dreamed of becoming. Her hands, still bearing the honest calluses of hard work, moved with practiced grace as she coaxed the young horse through his paces. "Easy, Copper," she murmured to the rust-colored colt, named for the town that had shaped them both. "There's nothing to fear here." Thunder, now her constant companion and the foundation stallion of what had become the most successful horse-breeding operation in the Arizona Territory, watched from the adjoining paddock. His coat gleamed like polished obsidian in the morning light, and his eyes held the wisdom of an animal who had found his purpose. At 8 years old, he had sired 17 foals, each inheriting his intelligence and, under Mary's guidance, his gentle strength. "Mrs. Baker," called a familiar voice from the ranch house porch. Mary turned to see Elena Vasquez, a young Mexican woman who had arrived in Copper Creek 6 months ago with her family, fleeing violence across the border. "The wagon from town is coming." Mary smiled, handing Copper's lead rope to one of the ranch hands. Elena had shown a natural affinity for the horses that rivaled Mary's own, and under her tutelage, the shy 18-year-old was blossoming into a skilled trainer. It was a pattern Mary had noticed repeatedly. When given the chance and encouragement, people often discovered abilities they never knew they possessed. The approaching wagon kicked up a familiar cloud of dust, and Mary recognized the driver immediately. Her father, Thomas, now 55 but still strong as an oak, guided his horse with the same steady hands that had shaped iron for decades. Beside him sat a figure that made Mary's heart leap with joy, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the first female physician to establish practice in Copper Creek. Dr. Mitchell had arrived 3 years ago, facing the same skepticism and mockery that Mary remembered all too well. But Mary's example had already begun changing hearts and minds in their small town. When the established doctor, old Dr. Williams, had fallen ill with pneumonia, Dr. Mitchell had saved his life with techniques learned at a medical college in Boston. The town had embraced her, not despite her gender, but because of her skill and dedication. "Mary, dear," Dr. Mitchell called as she climbed down from the wagon with practiced efficiency, "I have news from the territorial capital that I think will interest you greatly." As the three settled on the ranch house porch with glasses of cool water, Dr. Mitchell pulled a letter from her medical bag. "This arrived yesterday. It's from the Territorial Commissioner of Education. They've heard about your work here, Mary, and they're proposing something quite remarkable." Mary unfolded the official document, her eyes widening as she read. "They want to establish a school here?" "Not just any school," her father interjected, pride evident in his weathered features. A school for teaching people how to work with horses the way you do. The letter mentions your revolutionary gentle methods and their potential for changing how horses are trained throughout the West. Dr. Mitchell nodded enthusiastically. They're calling it the Sullivan Method. They want you to train teachers who can spread your techniques to other communities. Imagine, Mary, your compassion and understanding could help horses and people all across the territory. Mary set down the letter, overwhelmed by the possibilities. Through the window she could see Eleanor working with a young mare, speaking to her in soft Spanish, demonstrating the patience and empathy that Mary had been teaching. In the distance, the spires of Copper Creek were visible, including the new church bell tower that her father had helped forge. The town had indeed changed in the 5 years since that dusty day with thunder. The story of the blacksmith's daughter had spread far beyond their borders, inspiring young women throughout the territory to pursue their dreams despite societal expectations. Margaret Whitmore had started a successful seamstress business, creating beautiful dresses that rivaled anything from the big cities. Susan Baker had taken over management of her father's cattle operations, proving herself shrewd in business and beloved by the ranch hands. Even more significantly, Copper Creek had become known as a place where people could reinvent themselves, where worth was measured by character and ability rather than by gender, background, or circumstances of birth. Families like the Vasquez clan found refuge there, entrepreneurs found support, and dreamers found encouragement. There's more, Dr. Mitchell continued, pulling out a second letter. This one's from a publisher in San Francisco. They want you to write a book about your experiences, not just the horse training, but your whole story. How you found your courage, how you changed a town's heart, how you proved that strength comes in many forms. Thomas reached over and squeezed his daughter's hand. Your mother would be so proud, lass. You've taken your gift and shared it with the world. Mary looked out at the ranch that had become her home, at the horses that had become her purpose, at the people who had become her chosen family. Thunder raised his magnificent head from the paddock and nickered softly, as if sensing the momentous nature of the conversation. I accept both offers, Mary said finally, her voice steady with conviction. But with conditions. The school must be open to anyone who wants to learn, regardless of gender, race, or financial means. And the book, I want part of the profits to go toward helping other young women pursue education and opportunities. Dr. Mitchell clapped her hands together. I was hoping you'd say that. I've already been corresponding with women's colleges back east. There are young ladies there who dream of coming west, of making their own mark on the world. Your story gives them hope. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the desert horizon, Mary walked with her father to the paddock where Thunder waited. The stallion approached the fence immediately, his dark eyes warm with recognition and trust. Hard to believe it's been 5 years since that day in town, Thomas mused, running his hand along Thunder's neck. Feels like a lifetime ago. In many ways it was, Mary replied, scratching behind Thunder's ears in the spot that always made him close his eyes in contentment. We're all different people now. Better people. The girl who was afraid of what others thought of her is gone, her father observed. But the woman who replaced her, she's everything I always knew you could be. Thunder snorted softly and pressed his muzzle against Mary's shoulder, a gesture of affection that never failed to move her. This magnificent creature, once wild and untrusting, had taught her as much about courage as she had taught him about gentleness. Papa, do you think Mama would understand what I've become? Thomas smiled, his eyes distant with memory. Lass, your mother was an artist who painted beauty into the world. You're an artist who paints hope into people's hearts. She'd understand perfectly. As the stars began to appear in the vast Arizona sky, Mary stood in the place where she had found herself, surrounded by the animals she loved, the community she had helped transform, and the infinite possibilities that stretched before her like the endless desert horizon. The blacksmith's daughter had become a teacher, a writer, a leader, and an inspiration. But most importantly, she had become exactly who she was meant to be, a woman unafraid to stand in her truth, strong enough to lift others, and courageous enough to believe that one person's authentic journey could indeed change the world. Thunder's gentle breathing and the distant sound of her father's laughter mixed with Dr. Mitchell's animated planning created a symphony of contentment that would echo through Mary's dreams that night, and for all the nights to come in her extraordinary life. Tentar novamente, Claude pode cometer erros. Confira sempre as respostas.